The Empire of Izmir has long been a divided land, ruled by the mages, an elite group of magic users. The lowly commoners, those without magic, are little more than slaves. Izmir's young empress, Savina, wishes equality and prosperity for all. But the evil mage, Profion, has other intentions.
Welcome to Now Playing Podcast's Dungeons & Dragons Movie Retrospective Series.
Adventure, battle, glory beyond your wildest imagination.
Part of our board game movie retrospective series.
You want to play, do you?
Yeah, let's play.
We're gonna need a team.
Team? Who's gonna help us out?
Hosted by Arnie.
The fact that you see good in me makes me believe that there might just be some in there.
Justin.
See that there? I knew that boy had talent.
And Stuart.
You use magic. We are part of it.
But be warned, this episode will contain detailed plot spoilers and strong language.
There might be a loss of distinction between reality and fantasy, and possibly the loss of life in the process.
We hope you enjoy the show.
Let the journey begin.
Today, we're discussing mazes and monsters. No, I mean, you're listening to our Dungeons & Dragons series. I did not get it wrong, though. We're talking mazes and monsters, starring Tom Hanks, Chris Makepeace, Wendy Crewson, David Wallace, Lloyd Bochner, Peter Donnet, Louise Sorrell, Susan Strasberg. Directed by Stephen Hillard Stern. I am the Maze Controller, the god of this podcast I have created, the absolute authority. Only I know the perilous course this retrospective series is about to take. Your fate is in my hands. Let the journey begin. This is Arnie.
And Stuart.
And I'm your level 9 halfling, Justin.
Level 9, aren't you so glad you get to create your own scenarios now?
I guess. Is that what that means?
I don't think that it works that way. I don't think the people that made this movie like Dungeons & Dragons very much. But we should probably talk about it because that was all we ever played, Arnie, back in second grade. I don't think we played it right. I know that there wasn't a whole lot of dice involved, but we are children of the 80s, and I had an older brother. It was something that I always coveted. I always really wanted to be part of a D&D group, and, you know, I did a bastard version of it.
I remember how we met, Stuart. You were in my class in second grade, and you came up to me on the playground. I was sitting off alone, and you said, would you like to play Dungeons & Dragons?
Mm-hmm.
That was your first line to me.
Yeah, that's my pitch.
And I wasn't playing anything else. I didn't know what Dungeons & Dragons was, but I said sure. And we proceeded to play Dungeons & Dragons for 5 years off and on. Where, unfortunately, you had all the books. The books were expensive, but your brother had them, so you had them. I didn't have the books because they were expensive. I didn't know that, like, there were dice and fairness and anything. It was basically Stuart tortures Arnie and is like, no, you fall in the pit. Sorry.
Interesting, that's your take on it. Okay, all right, yes. I'm not going to say that there weren't times where I was like, I'm going to punish you, but yes, it was largely an act of creation and not ruled by dice. Yes, I agree. That was our version of it. And yeah, a whole lot of cats at some point. Yeah, we did other things that people that play Dungeons & Dragons don't do.
We really expanded role-playing games. I mean,
I think so.
It would be in the late 80s and the 90s that they'd be like, why don't we make Dungeons & Dragons but make it Marvel, or make Dungeons & Dragons and make it Star Wars? We were there ahead of time. We're like, why does it have to be orcs and goblins? Why can't it be the criminals from the Goonies and we're teaming up with talking cats?
True.
So you guys weren't playing Dungeons & Dragons. You guys just had good imaginations.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think it's probably on point. Yeah, but Dungeons & Dragons isn't a product of the 80s. I was surprised to find out this thing came out in like 74, and my brother was late to the game to be playing it in 1982, 83.
I think it took off in the 80s. What it really is, the creator of the game, or co-creator, Gary Gygax, loved Lord of the Rings and decided, what if we made Lord of the Rings a game?
No shit. You're kidding me. He likes Tolkien? Who would have guessed?
I don't know how you're connecting those dots, but all right, I'll go with you.
Oh, no. Wow. Okay.
I mean, he basically pirated the entire Lord of the Rings universe by having orcs and halflings and clerics and warriors and archers and elves, and created a game system out of it that is more complicated than anything ever needed to be. There is nothing more mind-blowing than trying to read a rule book for any role-playing game, let alone Dungeons and Dragons. And I want to give a shout out, lest anyone think I only call Gary Gygax. It's also, he co-created with Dave Arneson, and it was first published the year I was born, 74. And it's now owned by Hasbro. It is big corporate, but it was underground and indie in the 70s and 80s.
Okay.
I mean, it's a Hasbro property by default, though. I mean, Hasbro acquired Wizards of the Coast, who really took it to where it was throughout the late 80s and 90s.
TSR, right?
Yeah, TSR, Tactical Studies Rules. I never knew what TSR stood for. Tactical Studies Rules was the original, and then Wizards of the Coast took it over. But, Justin, you say it's Hasbro by default, but on their quarterly earnings, they highlight that the Dungeons & Dragons division is one of their highest profit earners.
Yeah, I guess what I'm saying is they bought their way into it, right? They acquired Wizards of the Coast and made it their own.
But surprisingly, theirs is not the first game. They actually were ripping off a game called Chainmail, which was a miniatures war game type thing. And it was also created by Gary Gygax. And he was basically iterating that miniatures game into a more story-based kind of dungeon crawl game. Whereas Chainmail was all about combat, D&D became more about character creation as compared to military creation and having adventures and fantasies versus just battles.
Right. I think it brought in all those elements. The thing that seems to be smart about D&D is that, yes, it does have the military strategy game part of all of that, but then there's like an art component. Like, I just like to paint the models. You know, I would just like buy the figurines and just paint them because, you know, that's fun to do. It's a piece of art. You can do it for that. You could do it because you like fantasy and Tolkien and all of that. It had a way of drawing in a bigger crowd. My dad played tactical games from World War II all his life. That was all his buddies did throughout the 70s. And yeah, that never had any appeal to me. But Dungeons and Dragons, yeah, I wanted to know. I wish I could have understood those rule books. I improvised, but they are ruthless. I don't know how anyone follows it to the letter.
What's funny is what I remember is I did buy a couple D&D miniatures back when we first started playing the game in 81 and 82. And this was so underground, you couldn't buy these manuals at a bookstore. I couldn't go to Walden Books or B. Dalton, which were the two bookstores we had in our town, or even Chapter 1 and Book Emporium, which were local ones. They didn't have it. I had to go to a hardware store called Black's Hardware.
Yes, I remember that.
And in the back of the hardware store was a small toy section, and that was the only place in town to get Dungeons & Dragons rulebooks and miniatures.
Oh, wow.
I remember that. I thought it was the aquarium place, but you're right, it was Black's Hardware.
No, the aquarium place was the only place to get Smurfs.
Okay, you're right. Yeah, that's it.
Aha. In my neighborhood, there was a friend of mine whose older brother played Dungeons and Dragons. He was older than us by quite a few years, so like we were never invited to play, but every once in a while we'd go to a store with him that was dedicated to it. It was called Dragon's Lair. You walked in and the counter was filled with boxes of assorted dice of many different sizes, and they had bookshelves and miniatures all over the place, and that was my only real walk in this realm, so to speak. You know, I never sat down, never played this game, so I'm kind of a D&D virgin here.
Yeah, the other thing I think about when I think of D&D is, I was a big Saturday morning cartoon guy, and Stuart introduced me to Dungeons & Dragons in 81 and 82. Well, come fall of 83, there's a cartoon series, and, at that point, I was 8 years old, turning 9 years old. I was outgrowing a lot of Saturday morning cartoons. I was just past the age of Snorks and Smurfs, and even the video game cartoons they had, like Pac-Man and Q*bert and Donkey Kong. I was outgrowing those, but Dungeons and Dragons, man, that pulled me in as a kid. I thought it was so intricately told, and it had like connecting stories to a degree where these heroes were trying to make their way home. Now, don't get me wrong, I also liked kid video at this time. I hadn't outgrown all cartoons. It is still a childish show, but Dungeons and Dragons kept a special place in my heart.
Yeah, I remember liking the cartoon. I really just didn't. I was always busy. I had soccer and theater and just other things. I was never around in Saturday morning to watch them. It wasn't even like I outgrew them. I just didn't have time for them, and we didn't have a VCR. So I didn't see many of them. But for some reason, that would be one that I would make appointment television. And my memory was that, yeah, it was a bunch of kids that got on a roller coaster thinking it was a Dungeons and Dragons ride. And then for reasons I never quite understood, they were sucked into the actual world and were trying to find a way home.
Yeah, and the dungeon master was a little tiny guy, kind of like Yoda.
Yeah, and there's a lot of them. There's like a bunch of kids. It wasn't just like 4. It wasn't like this mystery van. Like there was a bunch of anything you could want to be in Dungeons and Dragons. There was some representation of. Did they ever get home? Did you go back and watch the show?
I rewatched some. I didn't rewatch the whole 27 episode series, but I did rewatch some, and it was still fun. What's amusing to me is the voices. It's like these are actors who I would think would mostly be above kids' cartoon level work.
The voice actors?
Yeah, I mean, in hindsight, it's kind of exactly what they needed to be doing, right? Like, you've got, was it Ralph Malph or was it Potsy was one of them from Happy Days?
Yeah, Ralph Malph played Eric the Cavalier, who was a spoiled rich kid.
Then you had the little kid from 8 is Enough was the young blonde-haired boy.
Yeah, okay, the young one. He had like a unicorn or something.
Yeah.
Yeah, actually, he was the magician. He wasn't Bobby the Barbarian, who was the really young one with Uni the Unicorn.
Oh.
Okay.
Keep in mind, 8 is Enough ended in 81. So by this point, Adam Rich was a teenager. He was Presto the Magician. And that was always the class I wanted to play. I always wanted to be the magician, shooting the magic bolts. Yeah.
Magic users. Yeah. Magic missiles.
And then Willie Ames.
Oh, dear.
Bible Man.
Oh, Jesus.
Well, at this point, it probably wasn't even Charles in Charge time, or barely Charles in Charge, but he would have probably done Zapped around this time.
Well, he's also from 8 is Enough.
Oh, that's true. He is Hank the Ranger, the oldest of the group and the leader of the group.
Okay, yeah.
He has the magic bow and arrow. And you said Dungeon Master reminds you of Yoda. That's what this really hit me as, is this is Star Wars in medieval garb. Your bad guy is Venger, who was voiced by Peter Cullen, who, Transformers. And he was basically like, he was a winged Darth Vader.
Mm-hmm.
And there was a dragon voiced by Frank Welker, who was also, Transformers. So you basically had your Darth Vader, and then you had your magic user, or your Jedi, your Cavalier, your princess, or Diana the Acrobat in this case. And then you throw in a kid because it's a kid's cartoon. So we have Bobby the Barbarian, who, with his club kind of made me think of Captain Caveman. And then his pet Uni, the unicorn.
Well, Hasbro took advantage of this because a couple years ago when the movie came out, the Dungeons & Dragons movie that we'll eventually be talking about, they not only put out figures for the movie, but they also did a line of figures for this show. Cartoon accurate figures, highly articulated, and they ended up doing the whole cast, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, they did all the heroes. I saw them on clearance at an Ollie's for like a couple bucks each, and I almost bought them. I was trying to see, could I make the whole team? I really, and I'm talking 2023. I'm having these toys in my hands. Could I get my entire Dungeons and Dragons child team and put them together? I couldn't, and then it turns out they were really cheaply made. They're Hasbro figures, of course. Hasbro owns Dungeons and Dragons, but friends I have who bought them say like the arms pop off and break and like they just fall apart even just standing on your desk. They were pretty crappy figures, but I was tempted to buy them.
No, I was right there with you. I did end up buying a couple of them, but I looked into the whole team, and it turns out that there was a couple of deluxe figures that were only ever, I think some of them were Target exclusive. So to complete the whole set, you would end up having to pay 70, 80, 100 bucks for some of these. But the main ones were basically all on clearance there for a while.
But, Stuart, you asked if they ever got home. The series ended on a cliffhanger where they could return home or stay and still fight the evil in the realm. And then, if it had been picked back up, it was going to be like a conclusion to the first few seasons' story, and then reimagine where the story could go in the future. They were going to completely revamp it had it come back for a fourth season. But no, as it is, like Sam Beckett in Quantum Leap, the kids never got home.
Maybe one day they'll make the movie version of that.
I'd actually be more excited to see the cartoon in a movie than I would be to see any of the Dungeons & Dragons movies we're going to be talking about for live action.
I will share that I feel like the last one, I have seen that one, was pretty good. That one might be one that you might be okay with. But I agree, there's going to be a rough road ahead. And it starts right here with almost Dungeons & Dragons, but importantly, not made by someone with love of the game. You know, I think that's one thing that's really important. You can look at Clue and know they studied the game. Battleship, I'm sure that director, Peter Berg, grew up with playing Battleship, right? Ouija board, those people, they played with the damn games. The person that's here to talk about D&D is a 50-year-old woman who wrote romance novels and a column in Cosmo about Sex and the Single Girl. She is actually the inspiration for Sex and the City. And largely her fan base at this point would have been people that wanted to hear about waspy kids and their families falling in love. Why she's talking about Dungeons and Dragons is just a story engine for her to tell another story about East Coast college kids falling in love.
Yeah, you say it's not Dungeons & Dragons. According to IMDb, this movie was released under the title Dungeons & Dragons on video in the 80s. I can't find any pictures of that, but IMDb says this movie was under the name Dungeons & Dragons for a period, but it did come out as a book in 81 and a TV movie in 82 as Mazes and Monsters, and it's important to paint the picture of Dungeons & Dragons in the early 80s as seen through 8-year-old Arnie's eyes. Arnie makes a new friend in 2nd grade named Stuart. Stuart introduces Arnie to this game Dungeons & Dragons. Arnie goes home and tells his mother, I made a new friend and we're playing a game called Dungeons & Dragons. Arnie's mother, who was never very supportive of Arnie's friendships or dating or any part of Arnie's life really, says Dungeons & Dragons is a bad game and you're going to end up chopping people up with an axe in our basement. You can't play and you can't hang around Stuart anymore.
Mm-hmm. I was the bad influence in your life. That was definitely my reputation, according to your mom.
Yeah, the moral panic around this game is something that I remember more than people that played it, to be honest with you. There weren't a whole bunch of people in my life that played it, but boy, oh boy, did everybody know how bad it was and how straight to hell you were going if you were part of it.
And why is that? I mean, what is there a story about someone playing D&D and then becoming a D&D killer?
Oh, you don't know the story. I thought you knew the true story. Okay, there was a student at Michigan State University named James Dallas Egbert III. And Egbert was very high IQ, ended up going to college at age 16, just like one of the characters we're going to be talking about in this movie. And he and his friends would play Dungeons & Dragons. Now, near the campus were some steam tunnels, and he and his friends started going there to play Dungeons & Dragons. Well, one day he goes by Dallas. Dallas disappeared and he left a suicide note. What he had done is he went to the steam tunnels with a whole bunch of pills and was going to kill himself in the tunnels. But then he got scared, decided not to kill himself, and ran away and stayed with various friends over the course of several weeks. So nobody knew where he was. They thought he was dead.
Okay.
Dallas's parents hired a private investigator to try to find out what happened to him. And the private investigator found out that Dallas had played this Dungeons and Dragons and gone to the steam tunnels and things like that. Now, real cops were looking at this too, and the real cops were getting pissed that this private investigator kept giving interviews to the press and saying, I think this Dungeons and Dragons might be tied into this boy's disappearance and this boy's possible death. And so that got out. People started thinking Dungeons and Dragons had caused this boy to kill himself or to kill someone else or something like that. And finally, he came out and was like, yeah, I'm alive and Dungeons and Dragons had no part of it. And that's not a great story. So the media never followed up to say, oh yeah, Dungeons and Dragons didn't kill this kid. The kid is alive story is buried on page 18, whereas the kid is killed by Dungeons and Dragons probably ran on page 3. So the media reported this kid had gotten lost in the tunnels or something while playing the game, and nobody ever was the wiser as to if that happened or if it didn't.
Yeah, urban legends, right? Almost.
Yeah, only this one was based somewhat in truth. The sad thing is Dallas did kill himself the next year, and instead of sleeping pills, he put a gun to his head and successfully killed himself. So that story still has a sad ending, but it has nothing to do with Dungeons and Dragons and everything to do with a person battling depression.
Yeah, but that sentiment remained for a while, though, because in 1982, a group called BADD, B-A-D-D, which stood for Bothered About Dungeons and Dragons, came about.
Oh.
And they had a whole manifesto pamphlet talking about how it's satanic, and if your kids are playing this, they're probably going to hell, they're probably in the basement going to chop each other up, they have suicide pacts, all this crap.
Well, that group actually came out of a lawsuit. In 1984, this woman in Virginia tried to sue Gary Gygax because her 16-year-old son committed suicide, and she thought it was because his D&D character got cursed by another D&D character in the game. And so she sued them, and she lost the case. So she started BADD and claimed in the group's manifesto that Dungeons & Dragons involved, quote, demonology, witchcraft, voodoo, murder, rape, blasphemy, suicide, assassination, insanity, sex perversion, homosexuality, prostitution, satanic rituals, gambling, barbarism, cannibalism, sadism, desecration, demon summoning, necromantics.
Sign me up.
Sounds like a great Friday night.
I've got the 100-sided dice right now. Let's go.
I know, this is like selling me on it if she hates it this bad.
Yeah, and a lot of people.
Stop digging, you hit gold.
I mean, and that's what controversy does, right? Is that when one person says, oh my God, this is a danger, other people are like, let's go get that tonight, right? It probably increased sales to know that it was contraband. And I mean, I also just think that there's a part of the general mood of satanic panic that had been throughout the 70s and early 80s. If you were worried about your kids listening to heavy metal, you probably also didn't want them playing D&D. Yes, it just looked like it was another one of those occult things that was going to make them lose their mind or whatever. Again, I didn't grow up around that, so I was fairly protected from that as an actual fear. Like, that seemed goofy when I would go visit relatives who were more religious.
Yeah, so all of that truth came out into this book.
But again, I want to underline something that I think is really important. This may be the only board game movie that we're watching made by people that did not play the board game, that probably would never be interested in doing such a thing. They have another agenda, and that's what kind of makes it interesting. So Rona Jaffe, the romance novelist that I was talking about, was speaking to a true event. She actually wanted to at least use that as a jumping off point for one of her own stories.
Yeah, and it happened fast. She knew this story and knew it had to be turned into a book fast because the Dallas stuff happened in late 79. This book was published in 81. So she turned that novel out really fast and was just using the beliefs of the story to almost tell what I think she would consider to be biographical. She included a lot of details about his personal life, being young, being at college, playing in tunnels, and all of that. Only she never, I guess, knew or maybe didn't care about the real resolution.
She doesn't care about the real resolution, and I'm here to tell you the story is framed around Kate. It is a romance story, and it is largely about how is she going to pick between these three men. I have read this novel. This woman is more associated with Cosmopolitan magazine and giving women tips on how to get their man excited, and it has that mind frame. It is mostly about Kate, and there is a whole lot more about Kate, and all of the parents, by the way, have backstories. We learn all about how their parents fell in love and their economic bracket and all of that. It is a family dynasty soap opera to a large degree, but Kate, I would say, is more or less, for me, the central character. Who's she going to end up with all three of these men potentially being a partner? I'll talk about it as we go through the story, but she's definitely dealing with more than the Kate of this movie is.
Okay. Well, this movie I did watch, I'm pretty sure, when it came out in December of 1982. And why the hell would I watch this in December 1982? Not because we were playing Dungeons and Dragons, but because this movie stars, I can't believe we've gone about a half an hour into the show without mentioning him, Tom Hanks.
Yeah.
And I was a fan of Tom Hanks because I loved the show Bosom Buddies. It was appointment viewing for me for the 2 years it was on.
Yeah, I don't think I ever saw it, but just to help people out, why were they in drag? It was two guys that were in drag because they had to be for why?
For the apartment they lived in, it was an all-women's apartment.
Oh, God. Was that really the concept?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, rent was too high, and the only place these two guys could afford was in an all-women apartment building, so they had to dress up as Buffy and Hildegard.
Okay.
I can't believe it. I didn't even research the show, but I remember Buffy and Hildegard instead of being Kip and Henry. And so they were in drag every time they went home, but in their apartments and at work, they were men. So yeah, it was Peter Scolari and Tom Hanks. And Tom Hanks got news Bosom Buddies had been canceled. And so he took the next gig that came along, which was his first leading role in a movie, Mazes and Monsters.
Yeah, he had been in a slasher movie, I think, or something. But yeah, he got killed off. He's not in it very much in the early 80s. This is, yes, I guess, I would say a big difference between book and movie is that this is obviously more centered around his Robbie character.
Yeah, I mean, again, he's top billed. He took this because it was considered a starring role, and that got me enough to watch it. And I only had vague memories about this movie. And then in the late 80s, I happened to catch this in reruns just on some station, just channel flipping, caught it halfway through. I was like, hey, I remember this, and rewatched it. But all I remembered was the end. I just remembered the last scene of this movie.
Yeah.
And the premise of the movie, but I couldn't have told you much more about it. Fortunately, or maybe unfortunately, this movie has had a revival. It recently got released a 40th anniversary Blu-ray overseas, so you can see this in 1080p if you're like me and ordered the international edition of the disc. I got it because it had a commentary.
Oh, Jesus.
Yeah, I really needed to read the details of that before hitting order. The commentary was not by anyone related to the movie, but by 4 Dungeons and Dragons podcasters who seem like very nice people, but 2 of them had never even seen the movie before. And so it was probably a great episode of their show, but a really uninformative podcast commentary.
Yikes. Yeah, I don't think we need... Maybe a commentary would be helpful. But again, I saw this movie once. It did rerun a lot throughout the 80s. I think it was just one of those things. As Tom Hanks became a bigger movie star, I think that's what gave it life. What otherwise would have died with Dungeons and Dragons by the late 80s, it wasn't the phenomenon it had been. I feel like this movie would have been forgotten if it were not him. And my memory was that it was much more of like he became a killer. Like I thought that like he ended up killing some of his friends or something like that in the caves. My memory was that it was a slasher movie, and it is not.
Interesting. Until we sat down for this, I had never even heard of this. And I think part of that is probably because we got cable around 1983, so I wasn't watching a whole heck of a lot of made-for-TV movies unless it was, Empire Strikes Back making its debut on Sunday night or something. But yeah, this was something that was never on my radar. But to be honest with you, after watching it, I think it probably would have faded away and never be watched again if Tom Hanks hadn't been in it.
That's exactly right. Apparently this thing got VHS releases and replayed. The more Oscars Tom Hanks got, the more cheaply this thing could be played and capitalize on his name.
I mean, this was on CBS. No one liked CBS. They were the crappy network. They also had a fantasy series, which I do not remember, but running around the same time, Wizards and Warriors. Did you ever watch that one?
Oh, no, I don't know that.
Yeah, they were really big in trying to get in this whole fantasy thing. I don't know how the ratings were, but they were up against Three's Company and Heart to Heart. I think they had their ass handed to them because those were like top 5 shows at the time.
But by that point, wasn't Suzanne Summers off the show? So it was still a hit, but it wasn't the show.
We can discuss whether Susan Summers is better than anything in this movie after you give the plot to Mazes and Monsters.
Mazes and Monsters is a fun game. But for Robbie Wheeling, played by Tom Hanks, it became an obsession. He was kicked out of his college for playing too much. So now he's going to Grant College as a sophomore, and he promises his parents he won't play that game. Just like I promised my mother every day before going to 2nd grade, and I lied.
Yeah, don't play with that Stewart. Every recess.
But soon, Robbie has fallen in with a group of Mazes and Monsters players. The Maze Controller is Daniel. The Sprite is JJ, and the fighter class is played by Kate. Robbie and Kate start dating, but Robbie moves a bit fast, wanting Kate to move in when they'd only been dating a few weeks. Then JJ has the idea to elevate the game by making it live action and play in the local caverns, which have been boarded up and are dangerous. Students have died in them. This now starts to break Robbie's mind. He believes himself to be Pardieu, the paladin, and dreams he's being visited by the Great Hall, who's a person, not like a room, but that name is confusing.
Intentionally so.
Robbie starts to live life like the holy man he plays, breaking up with Kate so he can be celibate, and giving away his possessions. Finally, in a dream, the Great Hall tells Robbie to come to him, so Robbie leaves on Halloween night and goes missing. His friends go to the cops, saying he may have gone into the caverns, and the cops start to blame Mazes and Monsters. The others don't admit to playing with Robbie, and the cop thinks maybe one of Robbie's Mazes and Monsters friends killed him. But Robbie is not dead. He's had a dissociative event. He's gone to Manhattan, I think on foot, where 2 guys try to mug him. Robbie believes one of them to be a monster from the game, so he stabs the man. Robbie comes to for a short time after that and calls Kate, but soon he's delusional again. He goes to the top of the World Trade Center ready to jump off to be one with the Great Hall. His friends arrive just in time to stop him. We jump 3 months later, maybe poor choicey verb there, and Kate, JJ, and Daniel go to visit Robbie at his mother's house. Robbie's mind is gone. He's forever lost in the world of Mazes and Monsters. His friends indulge him in one last game as credits roll.
As we get started, it was rewritten. This was, although originally conceived as a romance novel, it was in the hands of somebody who had some genre credits. And Tom Lazarus, I guess his claim to fame, I actually never saw this movie, but had a minor hit. He wrote the script for the Patricia Arquette movie Stigmata. If you ever saw that. I think he was tasked with trying to make this a little bit more of an exciting mystery. And certainly they downplay some of the romance, some, not all of it, but some of the romance angles that were so dominant in the book. It starts here, really, by starting with the mystery that a reporter is saying one Mazes and Monsters player is missing in this cave. It sets up a whodunit, right, of what will be the unfortunate player. When we meet each of the players in the flashback, when we jump back 6 months before, we're looking at each person thinking, are they the one? Should we be looking at them as the one that loses touch with reality because they played a role-playing game?
And I do like this opening prologue here where we have this news reporter talking to the cops about Mazes and Monsters being dangerous and that it's a role-playing game, a psychodrama, and there may be a loss of distinction between reality and fantasy and a loss of life in the process.
Yeah.
Now, I didn't know this was added. A little behind the scenes, Stuart and I had a miscommunication. I just found out this was based on a book yesterday when I watched the movie. So I started to read it, trying to cram it in for recording. And Stuart's like, I got that. But I read the first prologue of that book, and it seems to fit because the prologue of that book is all about how evil this game is and how you can get lost as one of these 4 classes of characters and everything. So I thought this was actually mirroring the book in that way.
The book does share the idea that this is a regressive fantasy, but I'm sure this woman had had psychotherapy. Freud was still pretty big in the 70s, and a lot of this is just sort of a Freudian interpretation of when you go into the cave and regress and deal with your fears, 3 out of 4 are going to be okay. 1 is going to be screwed up for life. I think that's sort of the attitude. Those odds aren't so bad. You'll probably be okay if you go in the cave. I think it ends up being pretty good for Kate. Not so good for Robbie. But we don't know. We're meeting all of them. And before we do, I got to say my favorite part of Mazes and Monsters is I'm only crushed that it isn't Barbra Streisand. But when we get this song at the beginning, I cannot think of a greater disconnect between a man like hyperventilating, talking about how deadly this role-playing game is, and this woman singing Friend in the World. It is just from a different movie, right? This is from the romantic coming-of-age story movie that they didn't make, that they have this.
Well, and it sounds like both of you guys have some experience with this movie, and Stuart, you read the book. I'm coming in with my head spinning. Like, our opening shot is a point of view shot from the top of a cop car.
Mm-hmm.
I'm getting memories of Naked Gun or Police Squad. I'm like, is this a comedy?
That's camp to you. But no, they were serious. There was a time when that was real. That was real stuff.
So yeah, I'm trying to get my bearings. Now there's reporters standing in front of what looks like a amusement park ride. Like, it looks like it was painted on stalactites and stalagmites with like a hand-painted sign about a cavern. My head's spinning right up top here.
That song you mentioned, Stuart, I tried to Shazam it. At Shazam, I tried twice. It gave up. It does not know this song. Thank God for the internet. Haggard Hardy is the artist and Friends in This World. And if you miss it in the opening credits, they're going to play it twice more.
No. Again, can you just imagine Barbra Streisand singing about hit points and Constitution and all that? Like, she does not need to sing about D&D. We don't need this. This is not right.
And the first time we're hearing it, though, is honestly my favorite scene of the whole movie, the opening credits, where a car is just driving through the streets of Manhattan in 1981. And I've talked in the show many times about how that's my favorite city in the world. And to go back in time and see the streets I've been on back then, and to see the signs for the movies that were playing at that time. And I saw on one billboard, there was Creepshow, which we reviewed, the Stephen King movie. Then on another billboard was I Like to Watch. And so I'm like, oh, I haven't heard of that 80s movie. Turns out it was porn. So they're going past a porn theater.
Well, it was Manhattan in the 80s. And more likely to see porn than any other movie, frankly.
Yeah, so I just love this look at the city, and when we're going to come back to the city much later in the movie, the fact that they really shot in New York and really went to Midtown and things, it's just a great look back at what the city was like 40 years ago, 45 almost.
Yeah.
But back to that plot thing. Yeah, we're supposed to be looking at each of the characters that we're meeting, and I think JJ would be the one that we'd think would go crazy and end up in the cavern, right? He's the one that's going to discover the cavern, and he is unique because he is younger than everybody else. He's still a kid, and I think that everyone that goes into the cave and has their regressive fantasy, they're dealing with their trauma. I think that part of the reason why he imagines himself as a little sprite and all of that is because he feels smaller than all the people around him. And he even now is being bullied by his mother. He's a rich kid and mom has plenty of disposable income. And every time he turns around, she's redecorating his room. And I think he calls it some kind of sterile hospital chic that it's become.
And I might be a weirdo because I see Christopher Makepeace here and I get excited. It's like seeing an old friend. I grew up watching Meatballs and My Bodyguard.
Mm-hmm.
And hadn't thought about this guy in years. And I think this might be his latest work that I've ever seen. I don't think I've ever seen him act in anything older or later than this.
We did review him in a movie called Vamp that came out in 1986. He was the lead of that Grace Jones vampire movie, I think. That's what I really know him from. I've seen Meatballs, I've seen My Bodyguard, but I don't remember them. But I remember Vamp.
He's very memorable. I agree. He was a fixture of the early 80s. And again, I think the reason why you're meeting him first is he would have been a bigger star than Tom Hanks. He would have been the one people would have been tuning in for in December 1982. And yeah, he's got this charming affectation that he's always wearing different hats in every scene. Sometimes it's like World War I, sometimes it's Sherlock Holmes, construction. He's wearing a tuxedo with a construction hat.
The one time he's not wearing a hat is when they first go into the cave, but that's getting ahead of ourselves.
Honestly, he's wearing so many hats, I wondered if he might be on the spectrum, and it's just a constant thing. And then I wondered if I misremembered this movie. I thought I remembered the last scene, but we're being introduced to the 16-year-old who was going to college. I hadn't researched the true story. I didn't know the real kid was 16, but we see this guy as a rich kid, and his sanctuary, his nest, had been ruined by his mother, and his dad's the youngest publisher in New York, and I'm like, this seems like the guy who's going to kill himself.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
So I thought this movie might be about him, even though I'd seen it before and I remembered Tom Hanks going crazy. I thought maybe I misremembered Tom Hanks going crazy.
Yeah, and I mean, his mother's Vera Miles from Psycho. Yeah, I just think that, yeah, in lots of ways, they're directing you to think this is your star, this is the one that's going to take D&D too far. And in his own way, he does. He's working through his own things, but he is not. Again, we move on. We meet what I would call the main character of the novel, who is Kate. And the big difference here is Kate in the novel was attacked by a rapist. And part of the reason why she has to go in the cave and be the fighter is that she's always having this trauma of being in the laundry room and having a man with a knife come at her. So this game gave her an opportunity to be stronger, to fight back. It had a utilitarian purpose in that way. I think this author very patronizingly believed playing these games would allow you to put away childhood, that you would work through your issues and then you could be adults and have, you know, adult love affairs. It's kind of how it came off. But Kate is very much a victim of sexual trauma. She wasn't raped, but she almost was. And she went through a lot afterwards about not reporting it and having a lot of guilt. And that explains why she'll be the fighter character later.
Yeah, here we just find out her trauma is divorced parents and being upset about that.
She's a feminist. All men are chauvinists. They don't respect her. Her dad walked out on her. You know, these feminists, they just need a man in their life, and then they'll really understand.
And then this actress, other than Tom Hanks, is probably the one I've seen most since then. Her name is Wendy Crewson, and I primarily know her as the wife from the 3 Santa Claus movies, but she was also the wife in Air Force One, I guess the first lady in Air Force One, and she was in Sixth Day that we reviewed.
Was she the wife there, too?
Probably so.
I'm the wife. Does someone need a wife? I'm here. Wendy Crewson's here. Everyone, please, get your wedding ring on.
And she was not the wife. She was the doctor in the Death Wish remake with Bruce Willis. So she's done quite a bit of stuff. If you pay attention to these supporting actors and go back to watch Mazes and Monsters, she might be the one you know other than Tom Hanks.
I never want to watch the Santa Claus movies. I don't know who she is. I definitely don't know who Daniel Goldsmith is, but he's the Prince Charming, right? The novel really sets it up like she finally lands him. She wants him, but he's so perfect. He's brilliant. He's handsome. He's rich. He's too good for the school that he's even going for. She could never approach him because of that. But because he goes into the cave with her, they're able to find each other there. And he wants to be the Maze Controller because Dad is always controlling his life.
Yeah, when we meet him and his parents are telling him, you have a gift for computers. What I love is making games for computers. Who's going to make the games in this world? I kind of felt this. I was relating to Daniel very much there.
Mm-hmm.
This actor, David Wysocki, if you love daytime soaps, you might know him. That's where he ended up from here.
Yeah, he looks like a soap guy. I mean, yeah, come on.
Yeah, he does.
And he acts like a soap guy. And the storyline is very much a soap opera storyline. There are 3 kids that play a game that you really don't have a sense about. Again, they talk about mazes and monsters, but there's really no interest in setting that up. And this opening bit, it will take the first commercial break before we actually see the gameplay. You'd think if anyone loved this game or wanted to sell the concept of mazes and monsters, we would have that be the opening. But they just keep saying we need a 4th player, that we want to find someone that's not going to flunk out or freak out, and rolling into the picture, the Tom Hanks star is apparently a recovering Mazes and Monsters addict. He used to play, and that's why he is transferring in. He got kicked out of his last school because he got so obsessed.
I thought she said flunk out or freak out as well, but she didn't. She said flunk out or think out. I ended up having to turn the subtitles on pretty early in this movie because the audio levels, even on the Blu-ray, are all over the damn map. I couldn't hear half the stuff and it was too loud the other half. And they end up putting it on the billboard sign, flunk out or think out. I don't even know anymore what think out means. I think that just means quit.
No, like you would tell on somebody. You'd rat.
Yeah, you're fink.
Yeah, you were telling them that they're playing this bad game, I guess.
Okay, so that's what they're looking at. I thought they were setting up the theme of the movie, saying that, like, they knew this game would make someone freak out. But no, they don't know people will freak out about this game. They think people will think out about this game.
Yeah, it's kind of a dirty word. When they put up the sign advertising they need it, it's among a lot of other signs, and there are no takers. And we see JJ kind of hovering, watching, seeing if anyone will take the phone number, because that's how you advertise back in the 80s. You had to physically pin up a piece of paper with your phone number on it.
And yes, we meet Tom Hanks coming to class. We meet him last, and his mother's a drunk, not going to hide it. She drinks to get through the day, but promise me you won't play that awful game anymore. Drunk mother saying don't play D&D. I'm feeling this movie all over.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, he'll have his reasons too, that going into the cave will be important for him as well. He's got a whole trauma story, but he is going to obey them at the start of this. And for much of this first portion of the movie, before the commercial break, he is saying, no, I don't want to do it. And the only reason why he says yes is that he meets that charming Kate. Who could say no to her?
I do love that just right off the bat here, they're treating this game as if it's heroin, right? Like, I used to do that. I can't get involved. I'm trying to walk the clean and narrow. It's just a game, guys. Let's calm down a little bit. It's just rolling dice and pretending to be a mage.
Right. But again, nobody involved in this, well, maybe the screenwriter that took it over, but nobody that conceived of this story is wanting to sell audiences on that the game's fun. Even the author, at some point, she sort of underlines that it was important for Kate's development that she go through the maze. Like, really do want to have somebody here kind of like teach people about D&D, get them excited. But so much about this piece is like a reefer madness. Don't touch it, kids.
Yes. Absolutely, I was definitely thinking of that. But yeah, Robbie, he's interested in the game, but he won't go. He does talk to JJ, and JJ invites him to a party celebrating the birthday of Bridget Bardot. And so he goes to the party. That's where Robbie meets Kate, and they flirt by talking about making level 9. And yes, that's where the you can create your own scenarios now line comes in. The dialogue about the game in this is funny as hell. I mean, when they're talking about how big it is to make level 9 and what the things that means for them. And yeah, Kate brings him in and he promises not to flunk out or think out.
Yeah.
So we finally get to the game and it took way too long to get here. And this is where the audio really just crapped out for me. I just couldn't hear this movie. I also have trouble seeing this movie. The scene also is somewhat dark. I can't imagine trying to watch this on a crappy CRT television that's brighter in the middle and darker around the edges, because that's how TVs were in the early 80s.
Yeah, Tom Hanks' entire side of this conversation sounds like he's covering up his lapel mic with his arm or something. It is just ruffling and his voice is way low. I was like, what? What? Okay.
Big difference between a real movie and a TV movie, though, right? Like, these things are shot quick and not with the right amount of money, and you get what you get here. They don't sell the game. Like, no one would want to play this game. Looking at this graphical whatever, I'd rather do my algebra homework than sit here with these people and do this.
Yeah, I mean, I think they do okay. You know what I thought really sold it best and was probably really mysterious to people in 1982? Daniel gives that speech that I put at the top of him being the Maze Controller, god of the universe he created. He says, your fate is in my hands. Hold out the hands, close up of the hands. There's 2 10-sided dice. Now, I know when Stuart and I started playing D&D and I went to that hardware store, seeing dice that had more than 6 sides freaked my mind out. I ended up buying so many dice. I had 100-sided die, which was kind of a joke. I mean, it had so many sides you couldn't tell which one was actually up.
It's just a ball at that point.
It is. I had 3-sided die, which were just triangles. I had a 10-sided die. So he's holding out 2 10-sided dice. And that has to look like some kind of satanic symbol if you're already coming into this thinking the game is evil, that dice have 10 sides.
Or pills. Like he's handing you pills, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, he's a doper.
Yeah.
But we are told what classes they play. Kate is Glacia the Fighter, and JJ is Freelick the Frenetic, a trickster, and Robbie is Pardieu the Holy Man, who also has a sword in case his magic fails. And D&D players will tell you magic clerics can't use any weapon that draws blood, so they don't know their D&D rules here.
This is Mazes and Monsters, Arnie. It's not D&D. And this is important foreshadowing for why he's going to end up in the predicament he does. But his quest here, and it always has been, he's not really hiding it, is I'm here for Kate. I'm not here to play this damn game. Kate's hot, and we pretty soon get a jogging montage through that ridiculous song where, you know, they're falling in love, meeting cute in the library, and pretty much making the commitment that they are a healthy couple.
I will say this montage is selling this college to me, though. Like, it looks like a gorgeous campus in the fall. Lively campus life. I mean, I'm ready to sign up for my freshman year here at Grant College.
Grant University and not MIT. You definitely understand why you'd make that choice.
Yeah, and I don't know how much time is passing in this montage, though, because Robbie and Kate are getting really close together. They're playing the game, then they're studying, then they're playing the game, and they're running, and that song, that same damn Ha Good Hardy song is playing. And so I thought it might have been quite a lot of time has passed, but if we assume school started up in early September and Robbie goes missing in late October, it's only been a couple weeks.
Correct.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's college romance. I mean, yeah, that's what it is. Yeah. Within a couple weeks, he's sleeping with her and trying to get her to move into his dorm and really oversharing that he had this brother that ran away from home and it's been a trauma for him, that he still dreams at night, wakes up screaming for the older brother, Hall Jr., that couldn't handle those obnoxious parents we met when he was dropped off.
It's also worth mentioning another selling point for Grant University is the Emerson dorm rooms have private ensuite bathrooms.
Mm-hmm.
And enough room in them for a double bed. I could never fit a double bed in my private room when I had a private room. That thing was cramped. So to get a double bed in there so that your girlfriend can move in, I mean, that's really something. But Kate kind of freaks out about that. She's not ready to move in. But yes, we do get Tom Hanks' monologue. And, you know, I see why he got his Oscar, right? When he's sitting here talking about his brother who came to him in the night needing the money and how guilty he feels because his brother never called again, and if he hadn't given him the money, maybe his brother would still be around. I mean, this is right there next to that opera scene in Philadelphia as far as acting feats go, right?
I will say it's higher than you would expect for a TV movie, right? I mean, he's not chewing up scenery, but he's given a pretty good line reading here. My question is are we to believe after seeing all the events in this movie that maybe his brother was also infected by mazes and monsters? Did he go crazy playing this game?
I don't think so. I think it's just that he went down this dark path of running away. You know, that teenage runaway was another subject that you would hear a lot about when I was a young person. That like, oh, if things go bad and you run away, you'll end up on the street and terrible things will happen to you. So the idea that if you don't go to college and you don't get the grades, the job, and all of that, your life is doomed, I think it's just that's the path that you don't want to go down, that he's terrified. They never do in the book or in this movie give you an answer about what happened to Hall. This Hall that we meet, the Great Hall, is just, again, when you go into the maze, the idea is that your subconscious talks to you. And that is Tom Hanks' voice speaking as his brother, as a robed figure at the end of the tunnel.
And that is such a scene, that tunnel scene where he's shouting and running, and they're doing the best they can on the budget they have, but that scene is chintzy.
Well, I mean, again, one might wonder, why aren't we getting into actual fantasy roleplay? And that's kind of what eventually happens. JJ realizes this game is really lame and that all these older kids are hooking up and they don't want to really play the game anymore, so I have to make it more interesting. They're playing the game and he just decides to take a big risk, jump in a pit, and it's all over for Freelick the Sprite, and we need to play something else because who wants to go and spend so many semesters building up that character again?
Yeah, it's such a weird turn for this character because he seemed so into the game. He was the one who recruited Robbie. I don't know if he's just immature. He's only 16. He doesn't seem jealous about Kate.
I think he's gay. I think that they're trying to signal the fact that he wears all the flamboyant hats and throws Bridget Bardot parties and eventually will become a Broadway theater director. I think that's a way of kind of like winking without saying.
You might be getting something that even the author didn't know, because Dallas was bisexual, and they say that's part of the reason why he killed himself is because of his sexuality, and that's why he was wanting to kill himself. Dallas being the guy this whole thing was based off of the story I told at the beginning of the podcast.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but keep in mind, Dallas's story was not option. They're not telling the Dallas story and paying for those life rights and trying to honor that. This is a version of the book. And yeah, I just think that, you cannot say homosexuality in a TV movie in this era. So this is the best that they're going to do. Yes, he's mad that they're growing up and he's still a kid. So I'm going to hook them by making it more real. I'm going to go scout out a location, find out these caverns, and tell these lovers that they need to get their butts back into the game and play it my way.
But right before he hatches that idea, he's fighting in his mina bird that he's having suicidal thoughts. He's thinking about going to that cave to end his life.
And he wants it to be big. He's like, no Grant University student has ever committed suicide. And with private bathrooms in that quad, why would you? But he says he wants them to remember J.J. Rockway. He wants to go die in those caverns. And again, I'm thinking, is this the plot of the movie? Is it that these friends are going to be investigated because of the death of JJ?
Yeah, I mean, that's the red herring, right?
Right.
We heard from in the opening scene, somebody went missing in the cave. This is the most likely person to have done that. They're trying to mislead you and not make you look at the fact that Tom Hanks is, a little obsessive. Again, even now he plays a religious figure and he can really just devote himself intensely that he, after a couple weeks, wanted to move a bed into his dorm room and have, it seems like have the rest of his life with Kate. It may not look that serious right now because we're looking at JJ, but eventually it will be unavoidable. We will know that Tom Hanks is the disturbed one that breaks with reality.
Yeah, but there's still a lot of movie that drags like an anchor before we get to that, because JJ in these caverns becomes inspired to live and change the game and play mazes and monsters for real. And he's going to usurp Daniel, and Daniel's going to get a little miffed because JJ's like, I'm going to be the maze master now, and we're going to go get costumes from the arts department. I'm going to steal a skeleton from the med lab, and we're gonna go. And Robbie's the first one on board for this, and Dennis is in. Kate is a little afraid of this. She's like, we're gonna get expelled. I think she's kind of peer pressured into this. She never seems as into the game as her friends. I'm surprised she hangs around these guys.
Again, the concept is this is regressive. Playing games is what kids do, and she's falling in love. She's becoming a woman, and these guys, this is just a way of meeting chicks, right? But they should be leaving it behind. I think that was definitely the mentality of the book. I think that's still kind of carried over here. That I think you need the rape storyline. Honestly, I think you need her processing that she wants to be a fighter with a talking sword and battling these demons from her past.
Yeah, I just never quite got why she hung around, because all of these guys do seem to have problems and they keep talking. Like, there's going to be a scene later, I'll just jump ahead to some dialogue between Daniel and Kate. And Daniel is going to talk about how in the game he's trying to leave behind the fact that he's acting like his father and becoming his dad. And all of these guys seem to escape their trauma or deal with their trauma through the game. And Kate is always like, well, what's that like for you? Kate has her own issues, like we talked about. She thinks men constantly leave her, but she's not working through that with the game. Only the boys are.
It will come up, but I agree it's not as clean because, again, in a TV movie in 1982 for a family audience with kids watching, they don't want to talk about a teenage woman that has been through sexual assault. So we get this. This is as exciting as it's going to get. About the halfway mark, they're actually in these caverns, and, there's like a real skeleton that's hung on a wire. There are like real rats and bats and stuff flying around because it's a cave. I don't feel like JJ has just done enough. I think Rich Boy needs to pony up some more money, and like his costume parties have more going on than this live action role play.
Yeah, we'll see, they walk through the cave and JJ's out of sight, but kind of leading them through, and, they see the skeleton and they have to make a decision, so they decide to split up. Now they're walking through this cave on their own, and Robbie, and I didn't know this as watching it, but it becomes apparent that he hallucinates an actual monster from Star Trek and has to fight this big green monster in the cave.
A Gorville.
Yeah, it does look like a Gorn from that episode where Kirk had to construct a rudimentary lathe, as they say in Galaxy Quest, that famous episode. The rubber-suited monster is funny, and I wasn't thinking Star Trek, but now I'll never not think it for this.
And the way Hanks is screaming reminds me of sort of his comedic performances later when he screams.
He does sound a lot like Woody being dragged behind a car or something, doesn't he?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Well, I bring up the Star Trekness of this costume because in this movie's logic, I'm not sure if I'm seeing something that JJ brought in and actually is somebody in a costume, or...
Right. Did he just hire somebody to put on bad rubber suit?
Yeah.
Or is this a break with reality?
But it ends up being the latter, yes. Robbie has now had an event that sets him on a path.
Right. Even like on the car ride home, everyone else is like, oh, that was fun. We'll have to return the costumes to the theater department. Let's all go home. And he's like, bless you, child. And again, it's not long before he's having dreams about needing to be celibate and breaking up with Kate. And yeah, totally not getting out of the character of Pardieu.
I mean, I understand she didn't want to move in with him, but we do have Robbie's dream. This is probably, I think, the first one not about his brother, but about the Great Hall. And to attain the highest level, you must be holy in all your life. You must be pious, humble, and celibate. And he doesn't really break up with Kate. He's just like, well, I'm not going to bang you anymore. We can still date and just...
Yeah, I still love you. I just can't love on you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, holy men can't get married. And that sexy, sexy saxophone while he's holding her, too. Very 80s. This soundtrack is atrocious. But again, we don't really want her to end up with Robbie, right? I mean, maybe you do because it's Tom Hanks and you're thinking that's the way it should be, but we should want the blonde soap star, right? It's Daniel that she was meant for. And I think her arc is, the way that I read it anyway, is when she runs to him, every man has always left her. When she follows him to the caverns, he's trying to figure out the next step in JJ's Mazes and Monsters game where he can find the treasure. She follows him in there and gets lost. He comes back for her. He's the first man to come and rescue her and not leave her alone in the dark. She drove there. She has her own car there, but he puts her in the passenger seat of his car so that he can drive his little wifey around, and that's what she wants, right? This is a man that's going to take control. All feminists secretly want a man to control them. This is a really regressive mentality, but I think that's what they're going for here. That's what she's getting out of being in the game. I finally found the perfect man that I can be the wife to.
Yeah, and it's really the first time this movie gives Daniel anything to do, really. I mean, up until now, he's just kind of been furniture, but now he's finally joining this cast a little bit, and it's the first time that you think that maybe, with another red herring, that maybe now we're going to see what happened, and maybe Daniel went into that cave on his own and doesn't come out.
Right. And they had a commercial break, too, to make you think that maybe Kate was the one that they would be looking for in the cave.
Mm-hmm.
They give everyone a shot at being the one that the news reporter is talking about.
And there was a scene earlier where, God, there's so much wrong in this scene. But it's Daniel and JJ, and they're painting miniatures. Now, these miniatures are huge. They're like tiny statuettes.
Mm-hmm.
Having bought some D&D miniatures, you couldn't have enough on a board if they were this size. But Daniel is talking about how he has a bad rep as a makeout champion, and all he really wants is a girlfriend. Maybe he has soap opera looks, but to me, this dude is cardboard. I see nothing interesting about him, and we never see women hanging off of him. There were no women around him at the Bridget Bardot party. So when he's saying this, I'm like, is he being serious or is he bragging and he's not a ladies' man? But then in that car, Kate's gonna be like, I always just thought I was afraid to get involved with you because you're so attractive.
Yeah. In 1982 parlance, he is. I mean, that's the thing. It would probably help if he read the book and you would find out about the other girls he was with. But yes, I do think he would be the good-looking one out of this group. He'd be the catch. If that was your mentality, I'm looking for a guy, you would not even look at JJ, and you might spend some time with Robbie. But in the end, you go with the perfect guy, right? The blonde wasp who will have the great job, has all the money, has the looks. Again, she's happy to get into the passenger seat and just be with him for the rest of it.
And it's just such a scene because I didn't see this relationship coming. I thought Kate and Robbie were the relationship of the movie. So when they're in that car afterwards and, they're like, this is only a game, it became a lot more to me. I'm like, are they really falling for each other? Then they kiss and we get the worst romantic dialogue ever. I always thought I was like Mr. Spock from Star Trek. I thought I had no feelings like a Vulcan. I never thought I could fall in love. You're not like Mr. Spock at all. You're like the Tin Man from The Wizard of Oz.
This is straight from the book, by the way. Word for word. Exact. No, they didn't change a sentence.
Oh my God, it is so cringe.
It is, but again, I think that this book's author and this movie really believes like this is the ideal couple. They don't think that, it'd be funny to meet people and enjoy playing a role-playing game. They think that two people have finally survived going through this silly children's game and are now ready to grow up and be real adults. The problem is that her ex is spiraling out of control, that he's getting weirder, drawing two towers, talking about going on a quest, and by Halloween night is out of here. Yeah, is following in the footsteps of Hall, his older brother that left the family on Halloween night, but in his mind is the Great Hall because that sounds more like a medieval place.
Yeah, Justin, you mentioned earlier the POV shot of the police light on the car. And here, there's a Halloween party going on. And gotta love the money all these kids have for costumes and things. Although one has a cheap dime store Darth Vader mask. But this starts in a POV shot of somebody walking through the crowd. And I'm like, is this Robbie's point of view? Is this how he sees everyone as so strange? And then the camera turns to Kate and Daniel and they kiss. It's a peck, but it's a kiss. I'm like, is this what Robbie sees? Is Robbie gonna find out about Kate? And then the camera turns to Robbie. It's just a weird freaking camera movement. It's not even anybody's POV.
But I think it might be trying to tell you where everybody's at, right? Like the two people are falling in love and JJ is just enjoying being in costumes and being the host, the center of attention. And Tom Hanks is not having any of it. Again, he's gone. He's out of here. And the rest of this movie, I think this is where it really does pick up. It has been pretty much a slog, but this is where it gets kind of funny, or at least a little bit fun, that we got to find out what happened to Robbie.
Actually, I think that this is where the thing falls hardest, is Robbie has his third dream where the Great Hall says, Pardieu, you know how to find me. And he walks out like he's in a trance from the dorm. And we don't see Tom Hanks again for the longest, 15 minutes of this movie? I know there's some funny stuff that happens and they're looking for him.
Yes.
But unfortunately, I have been enjoying the Robbie freakouts, and without him in this movie, and when they replace his presence with the mayor from Jaws,
Oh, he's great. Oh, come on. Man, this guy is like, he's the funniest thing in the movie. I mean, he's like, he's probably dead. I mean, we don't have a body. I don't have any evidence, but one of you probably killed him. He's like giving them all, like, doing the Columbo thing, all like isolating him and interrogating each person, trying to make them crack here. You don't think this stuff is funny? I think this stuff is hilarious.
Oh, I mean, I do love the line, Mazes and Monsters is a far out game. Swords, potions, spells, battles, maiming, killing. I mean, that is good.
Yeah. Was he a doper? I mean, again, this stuff is great. It's like this is the guy that like is directing the movie. Like he like has this mentality like this game could cause all of this. And it's so off. It's just so silly. And again, he's so wrong. Like this is an entire misdirection. Why are we even paying attention to this guy? He's on the total wrong track and will never be right. He won't even be in the climax of the film, but he's here because it's hysterical. Because it speaks to the panic that some people were having. You're saying bad? This is the voice of bad, bothered by Dungeons and Dragons.
Yeah, I mean, he's the thesis point of this movie, right? He's the point of view for all these parents at home who are taking notes to yell at their child the next night about they're not going to play that game anymore.
Mm-hmm.
Let me ask, though. I mean, we've got this cop saying Mazes and Monsters is a far-out game, and one of Robbie's players probably got carried away and killed him. But given that the other kids, they're so old, but
25-year-olds, yes, playing teenagers.
Yeah, I think Tom Hanks was 26 in this, and even the 16-year-old was like 20. But given that the others all talk about how this game helped them and helped them get past their trauma, is this movie as anti-Dungeons and Dragons as it appears on the surface? Or is it just like in real life, this cop is blaming Mazes and Monsters, but the truth is Robbie has some serious mental illness?
I think in the end, I said it before, I'll say it again. 3 out of 4 recommend, right? You know, for 3 of the people, their lives are better. To jump to the end, Kate will get a book out of it, Daniel will get a girlfriend out of it, and JJ eventually realizes I could put on these kinds of shows as a Broadway director. So they all have new adult identities because they went into the maze. Again, it's a very Freudian idea of regressing as a way of emerging fully formed. But then there is that 25%. The people that will be damaged by it. And I do think this movie is serious about its warnings that it could harm, that you could Pardieu and wind up wandering the streets. It's even darker in the book. I'll just go ahead and say she really spends more time with that, and it really, kind of gross, really.
I really do think that this movie's entire idea is to poo-poo the game.
Mm-hmm.
That seems to be pretty obvious.
But eventually we do get back to the opening, and I'm like, oh yeah, we did start with a news reporter reporting at the caverns that somebody had disappeared, and we get all that scene again, but now it's from the point of view of the kids who, they've all lied to the cops, they've all said we are not Mazes and Monsters players, but they want to give the map of the cavern to the cop to help him maybe find Robbie, who might be in the caverns, so they're gonna sneak in while the media is creating a circus and firemen are racing into the caverns and leave it on the cop's windshield.
This is all time wasting. I mean, there's no reason to do any of this. It's just a way of bringing it back and letting you know, yep, we're back with the beginning of the movie, and all these kids are trying to atone. Again, they've done something bad, and I think the movie holds them somewhat responsible for where they're at. You say, is Robbie just mentally ill? I think that's how the mom will kind of spin it right at the end. But I think that, yeah, they all have some guilt about letting their, and probably they should, right? If their friend for weeks was talking like Pardieu, and they just shrugged it off, then maybe, yeah, they should have called a guidance counselor or something. There probably was something weird there. But again, if you're playing that game, you're doing something dirty, you're going to get in trouble. And certainly the fact that they were playing in those caves, they would get expelled. Everyone keeps talking about getting expelled.
Yeah, I mean, almost without the caves, this movie's trying to tell you that the game itself is illegal to play, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's actually the fact that they were in the caves that they're a little bit scared of. But now it turns into a little bit of a Scooby-Doo mystery, right? These guys have to kind of put together where Robbie might be if he's not in that cave.
Right. Yeah. The Great Hall, it could be his brother Hall. Does that make the Two Towers his parents? And yeah, all of this is just kind of funny watching them try to piece it together, figure out what we all know, right? I mean, there's nobody that doesn't know he's going to the World Trade Center, but it's going to take the movie about 25 minutes to get there.
I never thought World Trade Center, maybe because they don't exist anymore, but I never thought World Trade Center. With the Two Towers, I'm like, oh man, they're just ripping off Tolkien. And then at this point in the movie, they're going to be like, well, the Two Towers, that's from Lord of the Rings. I'm like, at least they're acknowledging it. But I never thought World Trade Center.
Oh.
But what did you think it was?
I didn't know at all. I assumed it was just something in Robbie's mind. I had no idea.
When he's wandering the streets of Manhattan, it didn't occur to you that that was going to be where the quest would end?
No.
Well, okay.
Again, maybe it's because the World Trade Center was only built in the 70s and gone in the aughts, but
I thought it was telegraphed. I mean, again, I thought it was really easy to guess where he needed to go. The fact that he couldn't see it, the fact that he could never figure it out was driving me crazy.
But he is in Times Square and walking around, and like any good New York scene in the 80s, there's going to be some muggers, and they're going to be wearing Fonzie jackets.
greasers that turn into Goreville and attack him. And so, of course, he's got to draw that knife. Again, the book had made it much ickier. They saw Times Square much like cruising. And so it was like gay men were trying to rape Robbie. And he ends up like hanging out with a drug-addicted female prostitute. And it was just much more sordid. They just really wanted to underline things that maybe you could only put into an R-rated movie. But more or less the same thing happens. What snaps him out of the spell for a moment is, oh my God, my hands are covered in blood. I've stabbed someone and I can call Kate and try to have her save me.
And my memory of this movie was, and I think it's because my mother told me I'd hack you up in our basement with an axe, but my memory was the game drove Tom Hanks to murder. By the time we got to New York, I was thinking that might not be the case.
Mm-hmm.
But then when these two guys take him down an alleyway, and there is no alleyway near Midtown, but given that he ends in a dead-end alley and he sees this guy as a monster, I'm like, oh, okay, we're going to get a murder. We're going to get a murder here.
Self-defense more than anything.
Yeah, the guy, we have to understand Robbie's not in his right mind. He is seeing this rubber monster.
He's also getting mugged.
Yeah, the guy who's mugging him should see his victim pull a knife and go, all right, I'm out, and back off. Instead, the mugger rushes him and then seems shocked when he ends up with a knife in the belly. I mean, if you rush at a guy with a knife, you're kind of asking to be stabbed.
It's even funnier because they're mugging him for a dice bag. Like, they're just going to wind up with 50-sided dice. He has no money. He's a holy man. He gave it all away.
Yeah, he left his wallet at the dorm, but he stabs this guy. I'm like, okay, we got a murder. The guy gets up. I mean, it wasn't that big a knife. The mugger gets up and just walks away. I think, a few stitches and he's actually going to be fine.
Yeah, in the book, they actually have a coda in which the victim was just laughing about the fact that, kind of regressive, but he was like, oh, he's a gay man. He'll have to come out to his parents sometime. I'm not going to be the one to out him. But yeah, he survived. We do find out that he saw Robbie on the news being rescued, could have said something, survived the wound, but just thought that he wasn't going to create more trouble for him.
And then Robbie comes to for a moment and realizes he's got blood on his hands, blood on his knife. He's gonna call Kate.
Kate tells him to go to JJ's mom's house and gives him the address. And so he sets off going that way. But something along the way kicks him back into the mage mode, right? So now he's once again lost.
He keeps seeing the greasers, right? And maybe he keeps seeing the Gorevilles.
Oh, right. Yep, he saw some guys that flashed back to the muggers, and that set him over the edge.
More trauma, right? He's just having trauma, and he wants to go into mazes, so he runs down into the place that feels safe and thinks that the subway trains sound like dragons or something. I mean, it's getting desperate here, and they really don't have the money to pull off the reality as Pardieu would be seeing it. I mean, it'd be one thing if they could visualize dragons and monsters and what have you, but this is, on a TV budget, just sad.
Well, yeah, and he's walking through these steam tunnels below the subway and stuff, which makes me think that if they didn't option the story, like you said, Stuart, they're at least trying to follow some of the beats from that story that people had heard, because the real-life kid was down in steam tunnels below Michigan State University, so I feel like they're trying to at least call back to that.
Yeah, they're treating this like this is the reason why people would watch. Why did that kid kill himself after playing D&D?
Yeah, he ends up in the subway tunnels thinking that that's the new maze to go into, and meets a homeless guy, and the homeless guy knows what I don't, that the Twin Towers are the two towers.
Yeah. Right. This is around the same time that JJ and Kate and Daniel have also gone to JJ's room, which I like this little twist. Mom has actually decorated it in a way that he likes. It's the set of Casablanca, and I guess he's fine with his bedroom being at Rick's. And they realize pretty much at that point, too, that must be where they need to go for this climax. And we have a lot of shenanigans.
Oh, boy.
Up the escalator, down the escalator, up the elevator, down the elevator, trying to get to their friend.
Have either of you guys ever been to the World Trade Center? Had you been?
Oh, yeah, I did, 99. And so it didn't quite look in this 80s style. But it's funny to me that it wasn't commercialized. That, like, you could just ride the elevator with office workers and not pay a toll to go to the viewing part.
Yeah, my memory is that there was only one elevator that was the express elevator all the way to the top. The rest were elevator banks that took you only so high up.
They created that, right? Because people got tired of riding with tourists, right? Like, I'm trying to get to my next floor. I work here, damn it. Get out of my elevator. So yes, the elevator that I rode didn't have any other stops.
Again, it's just kind of dragging on to get here. There's a little too much of the friends at the parents' house waiting to see where Robbie might go and finally figuring out Twin Towers, because they're like, where might a holy man go? I'm like, well, there's a buttload of churches in New York, so pick one.
But the point is, and I didn't really get this. This wasn't in the novel, and I wasn't really thinking that Pardieu was going to kill himself. But that's clearly once he gets up to the roof and talks about having a flying spell and, has one leg over the railing, which you couldn't do. But for this movie set, they allowed this. Yeah, they're able to pull him back. And it looks like Tom Hanks in a comedy role when he's crying here. It's like when he's no crying in baseball or something in League of Their Own as he's having this emotional moment.
Kate, why can't I remember? Oh my God. It is comedic. That's the thing. I always thought of Tom Hanks as a comedian until he really went Bonfire of the Vanities and then Philadelphia. And here, I really think he can't get out of sitcom mode. I mean, he's delivering this like this was a laugh line in Bosom Buddies.
Yeah, he's just not an experienced dramatic actor yet. Nor is he probably working with a great director. Nor is he working with great material. Yeah, you get what you get. And they probably didn't have many takes to do either. You got to get up there. The wind's probably blowing. Do it and let's go.
Yeah, I gotta give them a little bit of credit the way they shot that observation deck, because if he would have jumped off there, he would only fallen about 10 or 15 feet to the roof part. Mm-hmm. That thing was set back quite a ways from the edge, so...
Yeah. Again, we get that damn song again, too. The group hug and all that, a friend in this world. And then the coda that you've already talked about, Arnie, the famous, they all seem to be better. This was a good experience for so many, but Robbie will never be right. And Mom's okay with them coming for a visit. She doesn't blame them. Maybe she's not even drinking anymore. Maybe she's not with that mean husband. Can't say. But yeah, they come for one last hurrah.
A little bit of a dick move of Mom not to give him a little bit of a heads up that Robbie's not all there anymore, though.
I thought so too, right? Robbie's not right. You need to understand this. Robbie is still Pardieu. Be ready for that. But she's like, no, he's back in the backyard. Go play with him. No one ever comes anymore because he's fucking cray-cray, but yeah. The men in the white coats come for him, but I don't know why you're keeping him here. Yes, anyway, it's awfully silly that he recognizes them as Freelick and all of their fantasy characters, and they have to patronize him one more day.
Yeah, they actually indulge him by doing this, which is seemingly very unhealthy. And then the dialogue is really, again, cringe. Kate in voiceover.
Mm-hmm.
And so we played the game again. It didn't matter that there were no maps or dice or monsters. Pardieu saw the monsters. We saw nothing but the death of hope and the loss of our friend.
Again, this woman thinks she's going to be a successful author. Well, she is. This is coming from the pages of someone that sold a lot of books in the 1950s, 60s, 70s. So I imagine this was a bestseller too.
So Justin Stewart, should people play Mazes and Monsters? Justin.
You know, I said up top that I had never heard of this movie, I'd never seen it, and, starting it off not knowing what the flavor of this movie was at all, I was all over the place. It was probably 15 minutes in before I started to settle in to what the flavor of this movie was, but it was probably an hour into this movie before I realized what the real flavor of the movie was, which was anti-Dungeons & Dragons propaganda. And at that point, I started to hope that it would, really lean into that. If that's going to be the mission of this movie, then either really lean into the Reefer Madness aspect of it, right? Really go over the top, start making stuff up about what these kids are doing, really sell the sex, drugs, and rock and roll aspect of it. But they don't ever do that, really. You get some exposition from the cop who's talking about it. The parents don't seem too concerned about it, honestly. Outside of Robbie's parents, who kind of basically tell him not to do it again, even though they know that he's got mental issues, none of the parents care about this. But the whole idea of this movie is to lean into that manic fear-mongering that was going on around the time that we already talked about. The group ad that was talking bad about this game. I don't know if you guys ever heard of Chick Tracts, but it was this really religious guy who just drew these crazy comics that were always, Jesus and Christian based.
Yes. Yeah.
He even went into Dungeons and Dragons a few times, and that story is crazy. You should look it up. It's about a girl who gets into it, and her other friend hangs herself, and she doesn't really care. It's just like, oh, well, that's just part of life. Let's go join the satanic cult now.
Play some more D&D.
You know, but hey, I at least give him credit for leaning into it. It was something interesting and crazy to watch. This, overall, is just kind of a slog. I mean, outside of the cuteness of seeing a young Tom Hanks before he got big and seeing Chris Makepeace again, which just kind of hit me in the feels, I don't think there's much here for anybody else to sit down and watch. It's just bland, it's boring, and its message is muddled for a game that really didn't deserve this kind of panic. So yeah, I was kind of hoping for a brown arrow with the cast and the topics, but it just falters and it's a not recommend.
Stuart.
It's a board game movie. You've got to make people want to play the game, right? Even if it's not a real game, even if you ultimately want to say, no, but it's evil and you'll die and whatever, lose your mind and go to New York and do other terrible things. Like, you want to at least for a while entertain the idea that there's something about this that's seductive. I mean, that's what we're here for. We want to experience the thrill of mazes and monsters. And I think that's where this movie really got off track. I mean, it's for the first hour, it is pretty much a slog, and still having that perspective of the book, I could really see how much of it was like leaning towards soap opera and romance, and how so much of this was just about like which man the girl was going to wind up with. But I will say that once it finally comes alive, Murray Hamilton shows up to accuse them of murdering the kid that he doesn't even believe is dead or isn't sure that it'll ever be found, whatever he's saying in every one of his scenes, and everything that happens in the last half hour, I really was laughing a lot. So, like, the last half hour is really Brown Arrow fun, and that first hour is just torture. Where does it leave this whole movie? I don't know. You know, the weird thing is, I actually think you probably could have made a good movie out of this book. I do think there's enough about the psychodrama that somebody smart, better writing, definitely better dialogue, better acting too, could have really gotten something out of it. Ultimately, it feels like a missed opportunity. I will say I did enjoy some of it for its panic. I did enjoy a bit of Brown Arrow, but ultimately, a Brown Arrow is a recommend, and I'm not going to do that. So, Red Arrow.
Man, I was this close to giving this a Brown Arrow recommend for being so bad it's fun. I mean, you guys brought up Reefer Madness, and I was thinking about it, but the one I kept going back to even more is a 1980 movie called Desperate Lives, where Helen Hunt does crank and then goes crazy and throws herself out a window. I mean, that clip, she played it repeatedly on SNL once, and I checked out that movie. And I mean, seeing Helen Hunt fly out a window is how I feel watching Tom Hanks break down. Whether he's melodramatically lamenting the blood on his hands or weeping at the top of the World Trade Center like he just rolled a nat 1 on a sanity check. And the glorious nonsense doesn't stop there. I mean, Robbie's delusions conjure up some of the cheapest looking rubber-suited monsters this side of a low-budget LARPing. The dialogue is a crit fail on writing checks. You're not Mr. Spock, you're the Tin Man. Mazes and Monsters is a far-out game. Peak stupidity that's highly quotable. And then there's that god-awful song they play 3 times.
Yeah, you're right. I actually want to twist the arrow over. I think about that song. I'm like, no, that song is too good. You can't turn down that song. It's too good. Friend in this world. Oof, man.
Yeah, each time that song returns, it's like taking psychic damage. Nails on a chalkboard, but somehow hilarious.
Yeah.
There are treasures in this dungeon crawl of a movie, but much of the journey is just a long, tedious slog. The romance subplot in the opening, a slow, charisma-drained bore, and after Robbie goes missing, the fun police investigation is almost enough to keep things moving, but the film drags on too long without the delightful insanity that makes the best bad movie shine. Ultimately, I think with so many so bad it's good movies, the best bet is just search Google for Tom Hanks loses his mind in Mazes and Monsters. Or, if you have to, throw this on in the background while you paint minis. Because paying full attention to this movie is a greater challenge than a level 1 bard fighting a beholder. The lighting is garbage, the audio is inconsistent, and if you do manage to see and hear everything, the movie doesn't reward your effort. So, sadly, not recommend.
Hey, I'll give a green arrow to the video brochure for Grant University's Fall 83 semester. But outside of that...
Yeah, we would definitely enroll. Yeah, I don't know that I would study computer games or anything there, but yeah, it's a lovely campus. Anyway, it's not real D&D anyway. We're going to get the real Dungeons & Dragons movie next week. 2000, there wasn't anything bigger than Jeremy Irons, Thora Birch, in the first of 3 Dungeons & Dragons movies. Oof, I've never seen it, but it's always been a high request on Bad Movie Night.
I saw it back when it was new on video. I remember that pretty well. And maybe I'm going to be mistaken next week, but my feeling is it was unfairly hated.
Really? Oh, well, you're shocking me, because I've definitely got my brown arrows, I'm sharpening them brown arrows. I'm firing them into the air already in anticipation.
Got them in your dice satchel on the side, ready to go.
I'm ready for something. I'll be disappointed if it's another Mazes and Monsters. Not good, not bad enough. In the meantime, something really bad we're sharing this Friday for patrons. Even though we love you, we thought we should cover Showgirls 2.
Pennies from Heaven. PENNY''S.
Yeah, but it's not. Let me tell you, it's really not.
It is available to our patrons of $10 or more through Spotify, through Podbean, through Apple, or through Patreon. It's your support that keeps us on the air, and we give patrons a special bonus show every single month, and this month you get 2. So if you're not so excited for Pennies from Heaven, maybe you will be excited for the review of the original Showgirls that we put out last Friday.
Of course.
That is also available.
Yeah, that's the one you want, for sure. You definitely come for Showgirls. Stay for Pennies from Heaven. Yeah, it's weird. I'll give you that. It's really not what you would expect.
So we hope you can join us for that. Justin, Stuart, thank you for joining me. And now it's time to pick up the pieces and go home.
And so, we played the game again, for one last time. It didn't matter that there were no maps, or dice, or no monsters. Pardieu saw the monsters. We did not. We saw nothing but the death of hope, and the loss of our friend. And so we played the game until the sun began to set, and all the monsters were dead.
Thank you for listening to this Now Playing Podcast movie review.
I've enjoyed our little chat, but now it's your time to die.
We hope you enjoyed the show.
A wonderful performance.
Help us spread the word about this show by leaving a 5-star review on Stitcher, Podbean, iTunes, or your podcast store of choice.
This I give you now, trusting that you'll protect it with your very life.
Want more reviews like this one? In the archives section of NowPlayingPodcast.com, you'll find more than 1,000 in-depth movie reviews from our panel of hosts.
Welcome to the Adventurer's Vault.
On our site, you can hear reviews for every installment in the world's biggest film franchises, including the Marvel Cinematic Universe, Star Wars, Spider-Man, Batman, X-Men, James Bond, Middle-earth, Jurassic Park, Fast and Furious, and Transformers.
Are you listening to me? All I do is listen.
Plus, we have individual movie reviews, such as Titanic, E.T., Inception, Big Hero 6, Ready Player One, Pulp Fiction, Apocalypse Now, Dr. Strangelove, and hundreds more.
Has anyone ever finished it before?
No. They all died trying.
And come back to NowPlayingPodcast.com next Tuesday for another all-new movie review podcast.
Nothing can keep me from it.
Support from listeners like you keeps Now Playing Podcast on the air.
Give me some food and I'll give you a prize.
You can donate directly by tapping the support button at NowPlayingPodcast.com.
We are you gotta get. Right about now, we gotta get paid.
And you can join our crowdfunding campaign for early access to new episodes, exclusive reviews, and bonus reviews available for a one-time contribution.
This isn't about gold, it's about saving our empire.
Need more Now Playing? Subscribe to our In Focus weekly newsletter for exclusive digital download giveaways, celebrity interviews, behind-the-scenes insights, and more. Sign up through the subscribe page on our website and get it delivered to your inbox every Friday.
If you wish to join the others in death, insert your name below and I will notify your kin.
You can also compare notes with us on Letterboxd. Go to letterboxd.com/nowplaying.
You may take my hand, and I will lead you. I'll tell you right now, I'm not taking his hand.
And follow Now Playing on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and our YouTube channel.
Follow me, I know the way.
Now Playing Podcast is produced by Arnie Carvalho.
Giving birth to this nightmare is my most coveted dream.
Associate produced by Jason Latham.
I'm a god and a lord. I am really doing all right.
Now Playing is edited by Santiago and Arnie.
So we're the cleaning crew.
Cleanup crew's more like it.
Now Playing credits read by Brock.
You will speak only when spoken to.
Speak when spoken to, my ass.
The opinions expressed in this podcast are those of the individual hosts and may not reflect the views of Venganza Media Incorporated.
A lot of dwarves are afraid to show their true feelings. I'm not, okay?
Venganza Media Incorporated is not affiliated with, and this podcast has not been prepared, approved, or licensed by any entity that created the film analyzed herein.
You may have forsworn your oath, but your oath hasn't forsworn you. Just because that sentence is symmetrical doesn't make it not nonsense.
All movie clips and music included in this podcast are the intellectual property of their respective copyright holders. They are included here for the purpose of review, and no infringement is intended.
Yeah, well, have you ever heard of honor amongst thieves? We might live outside the law, but we respect each other.
Now Playing Podcast is an exclusive trademark of and may not be used without the express written permission of Venganza Media Incorporated.
The dark will never triumph, as long as the light inside me prevails.
Now Playing is a Venganza Media production, copyright 2025, and no part of this show may be reproduced, repurposed, or redistributed without the written permission of Venganza Media Incorporated. All rights reserved.
The most frightening monsters are the ones that exist in our minds.
Perlamon Tergatis.
If you could indulge me for a moment, he's going to tell Kate, I'm at 40th and 8th. I have been at 40th and 8th over a dozen times. I know that corner well. It's near the Port Authority. One of my New York go-to restaurants is Beer Authority on that corner where the New York Times Center is. It is at that corner that Hasbro did their Toy Fair showing every year for over a decade. So I know exactly where Tom Hanks is standing.
Perlamon Tergatis.